finally onto the drinking bit. This is the bit I've been waiting for, anticipating.
So clearly, stay away from the history and get back to the wine.
So everybody in, everybody muted, apart from Rachel, Mark, and Peter.
My family's been involved in the wine industry in various formats for about 9 generations. So I'm 5th generation on Excelsior. But before that, we were grape growers and winemakers. The very first vet who came out to South Africa was in 1697 from the Netherlands. And he came out as a brandy maker for the VOC. So we started the farm in 1859. And in the early days, we didn't have a lot of water. Robertson is a very, very dry region. We only get about 275 millimeters of rain. You could farm on small spots a bit of wheat and mainly stock farming. But in the late 1800s, we developed an irrigation scheme from the nearby Breda River. So that enabled more plantings of things like fruits and things that could be exported, dried fruits. And we started making fortified wines. Back in those days, people drank mainly fortified wines. Dry wines are a more modern way of drinking.
Being on the African continent, talk to us about the effect that climate change is having on how you're coming from an older vineyard that's, you know, steeped in history. How has climate change affected, you know, your viticulture and how you're having to manage that if it's having an effect?
We from a temperature wise, doesn't seem to have been much of a difference. The southwestern Cape is surrounded on 2 sides by oceans, which is a hugely moderating effect. But I mean, you all heard about the big drought in the Western Cape, 2017-18. That could be a harbinger of things to come, and obviously we are concerned about that. The fortunate part is a wine grape is more drought resistant than most other crops we've got. So even throughout that drought, we were able to have some irrigated water, and the vines actually survived fine. You know, wasn't long-term damage. Our yields were down, but not, you know, still at decent economic levels. So it's a worry, but having irrigation water available is going to be the key. And fortunately, we manage it very well. We're basically a wide bunch of farmers who realize that we're custodians of our water system, and we manage it in that way. You'll notice on our label, we've also got a horse. Since the early days, we were involved in raising horses. First Hackney horses for the cart market. Now, you probably would know that a Hackney horse is sort of you get various levels of cart horses. A Hackney horse was a premium horse. So we actually have a wonderful wine named after the horse called Evantheus. So Evantheus we bought from the London Royal Stables back in the late 1800s. He was twice the London Royal Hackney champion, and then went across to New York and bought and won the New York Hackney show. So we bought him, although we suspect that we got him at a great price. We suspect that they were trying to get rid of him because he was quite a difficult horse. On the ship over to South Africa, he managed to kick 2 people to death, but he ended up being on the farm for many years and started a very good Hackney stud. So after the First World War, we actually went into thoroughbred breeding. Throughout the time, we were making wine, but the wine industry only really started, you know, with sanctions. So the whole of South African industry stagnated, became brandy oriented, bulk oriented, and failed to modernize. In the late 1980s, we realized that South Africa was going to change, and we went and traveled a bit. My father and my uncle traveled, and they saw how the world had changed with wine, and people were drinking dry wines, modern wines, and red wines in particular. So we started planting Cabernet, which is still our major variety today. We planted the first Cabernet in 1988, and in 1992, we managed to open up the Netherlands market for ourselves, and grew from there. a few years later, started selling to the
So
UK.
If Cabernet Sauvignon is your main variety, we're not drinking that. We're drinking Viognier and Merlot tonight.
Drinking! We're finally onto the drinking bit. This is the bit I've been waiting for, anticipating.
So the wine you're drinking is the Viognier 19 vintage. Viognier is a fantastic variety, and I'm sure you've had some from all over the world. There's not much of it grown in South Africa. They're probably about 200 hectares. We've got 5, so it's one particular vineyard. And it's an interesting, very difficult variety to grow because it ripens up very quickly, and it tends to only get flavor development quite late in its ripeness scale. So if you leave it too long, it's going to get too much alcohol. It's going to be too hard. So what we do is we pick it at essentially 3 different stages. So the 2 stages actually ripen at the same time. Just how the vineyard works, we've got a very vigorous part and a very non-vigorous part. So the non-vigorous part gets that beautiful sort of apricot-y, peachy character, and then the vigorous part gives it a bit more acidity. So we pick those 2 together. So you'll see in your glass, you get that nice, bright, almost fresh apricot character, a little bit of that mandarin, nice acidity, nice body. And you'll pick up that's got a little bit of residual sugar on the finish. What we do is a section of the vineyard, a few days after we pick, we go through with small pliers and we clip the bunches and on the stem. So the water no longer reaches the bunches and they dehydrate. So we make it, and about 2 weeks later, the bunches have lost about 30% of their water volume. So they're super concentrated, acidity's gone up, and sugar's gone up, and we make a sweet wine from that, and we blend that back at about 4% of the final wine. The reason why we do that is Viognier has very thick skins and tends to be has a tannin bitterness, not unlike red wine. And we find the sugar just balances out that bitterness quite well. And that's why it goes very well to any curry dish. Curries are quite hard to pair with wine.
I've become a real Viognier fan, and this one I think is an absolute classic because it's rich and it's oily. If everyone wants to do a slurp, but it's rich and it's unctuous, but it's got that you mentioned I don't know, apricots or peaches. That's exactly what it got, and I think this makes it the perfect white wine for a curry. Peter, when I asked you to say what recommend a recipe to go, South African recipe, I no sooner press send, and I got a ping back, and it was almost before I'd even looked at any response. Cape Malay chicken curry.
We're doing Cape Malay chicken curry.
As per Peter's suggestion from South Africa, we're going to do the Excelsior Merlot and Viognier with this, so that should be fun.
We're just adding our own little twist to it.
It's obviously a local dish that you like.
I love curries. I absolutely love curries in all forms.
They look fantastic. Lots of different colours there. So amazing we use the same recipe.
Flavor-wise, it works beautifully with Viognier. So it was an easy go-to.
Love talking to you tonight. It's been fantastic. Loved your wines. Loved hearing all about it. Rita and I, we obviously know the area and everything, but it just brings us back. We just can't wait to come back again next year. We will be back again next year for sure.
Cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
Cheers, everybody.
Hello, Mark and Rita from the Real Wine Company here.
Hope you enjoyed the video.
And if you did, well, we hope you did, what you've got to do, you've got to like it.
Subscribe.
Subscribe. It doesn't cost anything to subscribe, so you just press the subscribe button, which gets more subscribers.
Like.
And like it.
And comment.
And leave a comment or something. That'd be great. Thank you very much. Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.